Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
WCAT Radio presents Just Plain Theology from Rome, Sweet Rome, program offered by Natalia Yusion on location in Rome. Natalia, welcome.
Hi, Bob. Good to be here with you.
So what's up today?
So today I have three very special guests with me, three seminarians that are staying here in Rome studying in formation at the Pontifical North American College. And I have with me Brad Jantz, who's from Alabama originally, and Tim Mergen. Where are you from, Tim?
From Madison, Wisconsin.
I'm from Wisconsin, okay. And Bob, that's your neck of the woods. And Benjamin Petrie, who's from Louisiana. And Ben and I have classes together, so this is how I got everyone together. But what unites the three here is that they were all in the military before either discerning vocations or, way before perhaps it was later on that they started considering this. But anyway, this is what brings them all together. So we have represented here the Navy, we have represented the Air Force, and we have represented the Air Force, two Air Force. Oh, I thought there was a Marine among us today. No, okay. All right, two guys from the Air Force. So all right, this is great. So, okay, where are we going to start? Let's start. I thought, let's do this the Christian way. Who's got the highest rank here? If you can relate between the two of you. So who would have been?
We're actually all O3s, but I would have longer time in rank.
Okay, so let's start with Ben. No. Because the first shall be last and the last shall be first, right? Anyway, so, so Ben, you're from Louisiana. You were in school and then ROTC, or you were originally wanting to go into the Navy and you went to school thinking this?
I went to college thinking this.
Okay.
So when I was in high school, I started getting the postcards in the mail, and I got them from the Army and the Navy. I was like, well, I don't want to do the Army because I could, don't want to go to war. But I was like, okay, so the Navy sounds pretty cool. But they were for the ROTC, so at LSU in Baton Rouge, I was in the ROTC there, and then that's what ordained me.
Okay. Okay.
Lingo straight. New lingo.
Now, did you discern a vocation to the priesthood in the Navy, or did you go out? How did that work for you?
I was in the Navy, so coming out of ROTC, I had to sign a 5-year contract because I was going to submarines. So about when you have a year left of your contract, you have to decide as an officer, am I going to stay in or am I going to get out?
Okay.
So I submitted my letter of resignation, and it was after I did that, which was not because of seminary. I just, for other reasons, I decided to get out. And it was after that that last year where I started to discern the call.
Okay. All right. And now we'll go to Tim. So what was your story? How did you were in Wisconsin, but I see that you were in Texas when you were doing your pilot training. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Wichita Falls, Texas?
I was out of high school. I attended the Air Force Academy out in Colorado Springs.
You always wanted to do this, or was there?
Not at all.
No.
This was a last-minute fluke.
Really?
I actually went to the Air Force Academy hoping to play hockey.
How did you think that was going to work?
It's a bit of a strange story, but I came home from school the senior year of my high school, and I had an email from the Air Force Academy hockey coach. And in short, my dad actually hacked onto my email account and sent an email to the Air Force Academy hockey coach, pretending to be me, saying I was very interested in playing. And he knew me very well, and he thought it would be a good fit. And I had a grandfather that had served in the Army Air Corps. I had spent 3 years as a prisoner of war. So this seemed like an interesting fit, and I ended up applying. I got in, and I thought I'd give it a shot. And at the time, I knew very little about the military, about how it worked. I didn't even know that there were chaplains in the military.
Really? Oh, okay.
And meeting my first chaplain was a groundbreaking experience in understanding how the church worked with and through the military was very big.
And you in discerning, you didn't leave and then discern. It's there that you took a leave so that you could do this because you want to be a chaplain in the military.
So I finished out in Colorado Springs, went to Texas for flight school, and then was signed in an airplane in New Mexico. And it was out of New Mexico that I discerned the call to seminary, and then I will be going back, God willing, as a chaplain in the Air Force.
Okay. Now, Brad, let's hear your story.
So I started at the Air Force Academy as well, straight out of high school. Had gone in with the intention of being in the Air Force.
And had you always wanted to do that?
I had not really growing up. Had never really given a lot of consideration to that. What it was, I was about ninth grade or so, and I inherited. My mother rather passed on to me a scrapbook that my grandmother had made while my grandfather had been in the Second World War. So he'd been in Army Airborne, had been on the beach at Normandy, and the whole thing. So I just got really captivated both by his story as well as just impressed at the sacrifices he made for his country, and kind of felt in myself a desire to do something similar. After a little bit of looking around, decided the Air Force was the route I was most interested in largely. Because my, aside from theology and things related to the church, I have a major interest in space technology, and that was true even as a kid. And so, as it happened, the Air Force Academy is one of the top places in the country to study satellite and rocket engineering. So that was kind of brought together two things that I was very much interested in going through high school.
Okay, and so then you were in training, and you were in the Air Force, and how did the call?
It was very sudden, kind of similar to Ben's in certain respects. I was coming up on a little bit over 5 years of time in service, and in my case it was the 6-year mark where I was coming up on the initial decision point to stay in or get out. It's about Christmas, I guess it would have been, of 2010, so about 7 or 8 months out from when I really needed to make that decision. It was very gentle, just started having it come up in prayer very naturally when I went to Mass, when I read the Bible, when I prayed on my own, all those sorts of things, started feeling a tug from the Holy Spirit towards the priesthood.
Did you have any contact with chaplains that influenced you along the way?
So I tended to mostly live off base, so I was more engaged with the church and the communities that I lived in. So specifically, I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it was my pastor there, Our Lady of the Annunciation Parish, and I'm kind of in the suburbs of Albuquerque, that was the first one that I seriously talked to about that.
But you're originally from Alabama? How is it you don't have an accent?
I'm sure the rest of the guys can tell you 10 years in the military will flatten that out quite a bit.
Really? See, I thought that was the place where you'd encounter others who had it. Perhaps.
Exactly. So I grew up with an accent that could blister paint at 30 paces. So in the interest of being understood immediately without laughter by everyone around me. So you laugh just imagining what it might sound like.
I've heard, okay.
That's right, you live in Coleman for 7 years.
Okay, so I'm interested to see how you would answer the question about how your training in the military, which would make you probably already had a degree of discipline ahead of time, I would imagine, because it just would seem anomalous to want to go into something like that if you didn't already have some kind of a sense of discipline within yourselves already, because if you don't have that going in, well, you sure will by the time you come out, I imagine, right? So you have that, you have this training. How has that affected you in terms of maybe discerning the call, first of all, but then now that you're in seminary and doing all the studies, has it helped you? Have you had to change your way of doing things, perhaps? I don't know if you've even thought about it that way, but Ben and I had a conversation about this a little bit in one of our classes. I was asking him, how does that work? Because seminary is pretty structured. You have discipline, and it's, what behooves you to have discipline, I would think. When you're here, it's at a monastery, but still you have an horarium, and you have to, certain activities, you have to be there for that. And, of course, you have your studies, and you don't want to fall behind because I imagine you have to keep a certain grade point average. So did that help you? Did it get in the way in any? Did you have to change your approach to things in ways you hadn't imagined?
Well, for me, it's definitely helped, like I said, that discipline aspect, because I've noticed, over here with the different responsibilities I have to take care of, there's some things that I just can't do, because there's so much opportunity opportunities for guys getting together, and there's so many responsibilities in the seminary. And so but you can't take part in necessarily all of them, right? There are certain things that you have to take a part of and you have to do. And so it's nice, and for those things, I find that punctuality is a lot easier than perhaps it would have been before I went through military experience, because you definitely have to be punctual, 15 minutes early. If you're not there 15 minutes before the thing's supposed to start, you're late. So it's helped me to be, it's easier now to show up to things on time and with that, but also just managing time.
Yeah.
I find it was a smooth transition to prioritize what's the most important and how to kind of methodically take care of things.
And how about you, Tim?
I would absolutely agree. Without question, the transition from military life to seminary life was almost seamless. Particularly the parallels between the military academy and seminary life are very striking. So the two are obviously very highly structured environments that are based on discipline and virtue and understanding that you are entering into something that is bigger than yourself and that you need to put service at the core of it. So from the transition from military life to seminary, it almost felt like I was coming back home to the military academy experience I had before. And there's plenty good and plenty bad with that. But then also as well from the military itself, growing as well in my faith, there was no question that the military formed me into a better person and gave me profound human formation that the seminary longs for, I think, in certain ways.
In what way, for example?
Well, and certainly, as Ben mentioned, just being punctual, making sure that you can be on time, you can run a schedule. You're going to have to interact with people from all over the world, people from different environments coming together, and it sort of gives you a background of nature and experience that grace can build upon. And I found, especially, and the military isn't always the best at using this sort of language, but when I first went into the military, I was sort of surprised with what I heard. I had heard varying opinions about what the military is, what is this organization, should we support it, should we not, and all I can remember is just being talked about honor and integrity were the most important things that you are going to have to carry with you for a military career, and character is everything.
Yeah.
And seeing that and seeing how that was the first thing that was taught to me and really instilled on me at a deeper level helped me grow in my faith immensely. So I really did discern my vocation through the military, and for that I'm eternally grateful.
Thank you, Brad.
I'd echo a few of the things Tim said there, specifically about the military, giving you a good base of experience and just relating to people from a variety of walks of life and backgrounds. Say certainly myself, being in now my 6th year of seminary, the deacon year of it, and starting to get more engaged in active pastoral ministry, that experience is absolutely invaluable.
That's another good question. I'm wondering the transition that you mentioned was fairly smooth, going from the military, from the academy, the training you had, to the discipline of seminary life. Once you get into the pastoral environment, was that more difficult in any way, or did you sort of take to it well? Did you have to change your approach to things? You can't approach kids' catechism class the way you might with a bunch of
might want to, yes.
might want to. I've been there,
Yeah, there's some commonalities with it. I know certainly my experience as an officer was that in the military you don't pick the people you're working with. You have the people that are there with you, and those are the people you have to do the mission. And especially when you're in a supervisory role, you have to take care of those people, so if they're not functioning well in their home life, they're not going to be functioning well at work. If there's a major personal situation, you have to be attentive to that and understand how to work around that. And again, with a variety of personalities that you wouldn't necessarily have picked to do that job yourself. And so I find just the adaptability that you have to take, and again, in pastoral ministry, the people that you work with are something of a given. It's the Holy Spirit who places those people in your path, not your own choices. Perhaps I might want to minister with this group over there because I feel like I've got a better connection with them, but that's not the way it works in the priestly life. So that's certainly that general attitude of flexibility in personal relationships and being open to what higher headquarters, as it were, is wanting you to do.
another question I had too is when it comes to the orders coming from on high, it's what you're doing. Now you're saying, the Holy Spirit is putting people in your path, so the people you're dealing with in ministry are those that God has sent. You can't really choose, and it's a better choice to just let go, as it were. Do you find that aspect difficult at all spiritually, that sort of letting go sometimes of, because when you're in the military, to me it seems like you've got a certain training, you have to have your shop in order, otherwise, especially if you're in a combat situation, lives are at stake. So you really have to make sure everything's under your control, if it's under your control. Suddenly, when you're going to the spiritual life, there comes a point where sometimes you can't be, and you shouldn't be. You got to let God do it. And is that letting go difficult? Have you had to struggle with that at all? Or? Okay, you go. Okay, go ahead, Brad. You can follow up because you laughed first.
Okay. No, I think that's a struggle for everyone, regardless of whether you come from a military background or not. I think just as human beings, we sort of like to have our own little perfect garden that we have everything set up the way we want. Well, and as it turns out, the garden we make is not the Garden of Eden that the Lord wants to put us into, and so some rearranging has to happen. That said, some of the specifics of how that relates between military life and then looking more towards a pastoral direction, I think for me it's really actually come more along the formational process, just things that have come into my life through the process of seminary that are things I would never have chosen. For example, during last year, towards the beginning of the year, I had a fairly major injury just while out jogging one day that required me to take a lot of time off during that semester, spent a lot of time recovering in a hospital bed from a series of surgeries. Not something I would have chosen at
here, not at home, right?
A bit of both. So the first portion was over here, and then I went home for the rest of the recovery. It's still something I struggle with a little bit from time to time. But it was interesting for me this past summer, my first summer as a deacon, doing active ministry in the parish. It was interesting because doing communion calls at hospitals or even homebound visits, having from my own experience an ability to speak to people where they were at, an understanding, a very personal understanding of exactly the struggles they were going through. Not that you say, well, I know exactly what you're going through, and 6 months from now, this is what obviously you don't do that, but knowing what people need to hear in those situations. That's why, like I said, for me, the whole recovery process on that was very much an act of trust in God. Okay, Lord, you've called me to be here. You've called me to be in the place where I'm at right now, and as much as I prefer to be doing something else right now, I literally can't do anything else but just let go and let you do it.
And you were laughing too, so you must have a story about that.
Well, I echo everything Brad said, but this makes me think of kind of a very practical aspect of being with other guys in groups where you might be the leader of this group, because in the military, we speak to each other in a certain way, particularly by way of command, right? So if I'm the leader for particular guys that I'm supervising, if I want something done, I just give the order, right? I give it in a certain way, it's repeated back to me, so we're all on the same page, and it's executed, right? In the regular world, it's not how it works. And it shouldn't work that way, right? There's a reason why the military does things that way. And so it has been a struggle, at least for me, to find this balance of how to motivate a group of guys, how to assign tasks, how to give orders, for lack of a better word, but do it in a way that respects the position of both of us as now lay people, respects their dignity, but also is loving and kind.
How did you do that?
I'm still learning. I haven't perfected it
yet. How about you?
Oh, well, control is something that every man wants in his life, and is not something that is easily given up, and there's no question about that. In fact, that has been largely a theme for my whole year, figuring out how is it that I'm supposed to give control over to the Lord, and what does that actually look like? Because the military, in a certain sense, trains you to ensure that you can control everything that you can possibly control. You want to pay very close attention to detail. In the flying community, it was always stay ahead of the airplane, make sure you know what's coming in front of you, so that you can react quickly and understand all of these conditions. And even having a good talk with my bishop this year about knowing that I have the ability via military training to sort of control and understand different environments and take all these different inputs and adapt them to my situation. Mm-hmm. And he said, don't. He said, stop. And he gave this incredible insight that I'm still reflecting on, and I think will be for a long amount of time, because in the seminary we are preparing to go to the altar every day for the rest of our life. We're preparing to go to Calvary every day, and every one of us is called to carry our cross. And he said, when you try to control and over-control, you put yourself up on the cross. And if you put yourself up on the cross, it's just that easy to come down from the cross. And when the tough times come, you're just going to bring yourself back down. But it's really that full surrender to allow the Lord to put you on the cross, give him that control, and that will allow you to bear that cross and to carry it with him and through his grace.
Yeah, that reminds me of something. I had a friend of mine who had brought me to this. It was a Maronite monastery in Massachusetts. And the abbot there was a very holy man. He was also, prior to entering religious life, was a psychologist. And so he had great insight into people, human nature, and the whole thing. I remember one thing he said was, don't bother figuring out what your crosses are going to be in any situation, because what you think is going to be a cross won't be, and what you don't think will be just might be. So better not to even, and just what comes your way, carry that. But don't go looking for one that you want to make to your measure. It's just not going to work. So, as a pilot, it's interesting what you had said also. You must have to be trained to have a panoramic view of things and also to see well ahead of what's coming. Actually, when you said that, it reminded me, I was a cantor at my church for a while. You have to do the same thing when you're cantoring. I'm a Ukrainian Catholic, Byzantine Rite. So there's a lot of dialogue and chant going back and forth. You've always got to be 3 steps ahead of the priest because he may do something else and you may have to think, well, what's he going? Or he may change key or something, and you just got to be on your toes. But you have to look ahead all the time, be 3 steps ahead of him in that way. So yeah, but that makes you want to have all kinds of control also. We even want to do that in all kinds of realms. How about your spiritualities? Have you found out, for example, the title I was giving to this sort of interview on the blog page is going to be The Church Militant. But as I was thinking about that, it brought to mind an article I read someplace, I can't remember where, but it was somebody who was talking about different spiritualities and the natural receptivity of the human soul towards God because we receive everything from him. And this person was speaking of a kind of almost nuptial spirituality, if you will, thinking of Christ as the bridegroom and all of that. That is very natural for a woman. And he was saying, well, guys just have to do this too because they just have to suck it up. And I thought, well, that's really not the attitude you would want to have towards a bridegroom anyway, so I don't know that this approach works well. I would want to see that marriage, but whatever. But I also remember reading in a book by a Dominican named Father Dominic Hoffman, who spoke about the different spiritualities that men will go towards and women will go towards. In other words, don't try and force anything. So his idea was, without speaking of complementarity per se, he was alluding to the fact that women, perhaps in a receptive way in their souls, would be more like Mary Magdalene sitting at the feet of Christ, sort of, waiting on God, as it were. Whereas men tend to be the ones who are going out to meet him. There's a different dynamic there. So I wonder if you guys, like, for example, the Jesuits, you don't have a female branch. He was in the military, St. Ignatius. I mean, there's a lot of military vocabulary in that spirituality, and a lot of people will go to that for the certain elements of discernment, for example, and all that. But in general, I don't know how much that imagery works for lots of women. And in fact, any orders of nuns, I've heard of a few that have taken their reform ideals from the Jesuits, but they've been active orders. This happened in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine. Always the active orders. But there isn't a female branch, right? It's a whole different we've got the Dominicans, Benedictines, Carmelites, you name it, but not with them. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it. It just occurred to me. So I wondered about the different kinds of spiritual paths you've gone on, or if there are certain saints that you are really drawn to, spiritual books that have really worked for you.
Well, I can certainly say that one major aspect of my spirituality has been the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I think that's pretty natural for a priest. I mean, we definitely hear it talked about often when you go through seminary as sort of the Blessed Virgin Mary having a very important role in a priest's life. And so I can relate to that totally. She was a major reason for, I always attribute my vocation really to her, and my kind of sort of constancy with the rosary. And I could almost, in a sense too, before I really entered seminary formation, that in those down times I could always go to her, even though sometimes I might have been afraid to go to Christ. So for me, she's definitely played a major role. And it does seem to make sense because I'm not, although I think I'm called to a life of celibacy, I don't reject natural marriage and the good of that and this complementarity that is between a man and woman. And so in a sense, Mary is my counterpart, you know. She's my mother, my queen, you know. So that relating with Mary has been a major aspect of my spirituality. I would also say, though, that I've been very much inspired by St. John Paul II, even St. Peter. I was reminded by my mother a few months back that of my confirmation saint that I picked. I had totally forgotten. She said, I asked her, so what did I pick? She said, well, you picked St. Peter. Because he's the best. All right, Mom, I like that. I'm good with that, yeah. So there is something about the male saint that has done something that speaks to my heart and motivates me to go and do something. Maybe in a way to meet Christ, to go to Christ.
Right. And you're going to be ordained a deacon next year? Or in September. Where? At St. Peter's. I love it. That's great. Okay. What about you, Tim?
Well, actually, my confirmation saint was also St. Peter, so maybe there is something.
Maybe.
And also, I mean, the Blessed Mother is so very important to all of us, and she guided me to my vocation, and I attribute that and Eucharistic adoration, as well as a solid men's group that really brought me to understand and to a greater love of my faith in a way that I had not had growing up.
A men's group before you got to seminary, or?
Yes, it was actually a men's group on the Air Force Base in New Mexico.
What was that like? I mean, what did you all, how did that work? Do you get together, you pray, did you have adoration?
It was the priest brought it together at the recommendation of one other man in the parish, and we got together first reading the book Boys to Men by Curtis Martin, and it was a book on the virtues, and that just fit in incredibly well with what the military is trying to instill. And from there, it just became sort of an organic growth where we would have time spent together, just going over to someone's house and cooking, or playing cards, or we would meet and talk about the book. We'd have Bible study. We would do events. We went to a conference with Scott Hahn. Got a bunch of guys together. So there's a number of different things that really helped with that aspect. But especially for me as a younger seminarian here compared to the other two guys, this being my first year of theology, I think I'm still discovering what my spirituality is, and what the spirituality of a diocesan priest is, and especially for a chaplain, which I think has to have a very encompassing range of understanding what it is that different people are drawn to. But with that being said, I would say from the military, anytime I hear the word mission, it strikes up a chord, because that is, as you can guess, mission first, people always was a phrase in the Air Force when I was around. And so this idea of mission and going out is definitely one that does strike to my heart, and I think strikes to the heart of many men. But at the same time, I'm also not opposed to the spousal imagery and even sort of the contemplative reception. That was largely due to an incredible seminary class I had on St. John of the Cross and understanding the Carmelite spirituality and understanding Christ as a spouse and as the bridegroom for us.
What did you read that which of his works lit a fire for you?
We actually read all of them. At least parts of, and we had the teacher was able to synthesize all of them together. But I think the Dark Knight, the treatise on the Dark Knight was probably the most profound, as well as some of his poetry. It was just absolutely incredible. It's the first time I'd ever been moved by poetry. So So that being said, definitely mission, but that's not opposed to receptivity as well.
Yeah, because in the end, that's built into our being anyway, because we do receive everything. You can't get away from it. It's not always necessarily reflected upon. Perhaps it's not. I don't know. This is why we're having a conversation. Okay, Brad, your turn.
Well, I hate to break a pattern, but my confirmation patron was St. Augustine. Not St. Peter, so perhaps a little different take on things. I was 25 when I was confirmed.
Okay, so it was a big...
Yes, came into the church as an adult.
Oh, I see. You guys are cradle-Catholics. Is that right? Or
I was baptized when I was 5.
Okay.
My mom converted.
Okay.
But I was raised Catholic.
You were raised Catholic. So you came into the church in your 20s.
Indeed.
And you were before...
Had mostly grown up Southern Baptist, a little bit of everything. But that was, at least in my teenage years.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Okay, so we're going on a whole different tangent here, but that's great. The Holy Spirit's working here. Okay. So was there a specific thing that was drawing you to the church? Was it someone you met? Or?
It was really a process that drug on for the better part of a decade. Mm-hmm. One of the things, I won't say anything bad about the way I was raised, because I really am appreciative of the gifts that I received, having grown up in a Southern Baptist environment. A genuine love for Jesus Christ. I mean, that was, my mother often said she wanted to be the first person to tell me about Jesus. She couldn't wait until I was old enough to understand what she was saying. Yeah. So, there's something very beautiful about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
A knowledge of the Scriptures certainly was something that I was raised with, as well as just a good, solid moral foundation that has served me well over the years. One of the difficulties, though, I think, with growing up Southern Baptist for somebody with intellectual inclinations is often, and this isn't necessarily a patch on the people I knew, but you start asking certain types of questions about why do we believe this particular thing in this particular way? Why do we believe this and not that? So for me, those questions through my teenage years became pretty serious difficulties with the faith I was raised with. I was very relieved when I got to the Air Force Academy to start meeting Christians from both different parts of the country as well as different traditions, because at least in rural Alabama, just about every person you meet is going to be Southern Baptist or Methodist, which makes as little difference as anything down there. I don't think I could have told you what the difference was between a Baptist and a Methodist until I was in my 20s. So anyways, going through that process of meeting people from a little bit different backgrounds of Christianity, where you could practice your faith, but also ask very serious questions about that and expect to run into answers. So that was very attractive. And so coming into the church was, in a sense, both the intellectual journey there as well as having a number of spiritual experiences throughout my college years and on into time in service. Specifically, found myself very drawn to the Rosary, even kind of when I was nominally Southern Baptist, which came about as the result of a close friend of mine that I'd been through basic training with, who died suddenly towards the end of our freshman year at the academy. He was Catholic. The funeral was Catholic as all get out. But I remember the day he died, a couple of members of our squadron, so the unit I was in, got us together and said, hey, anybody who wants to pray, let's get together and pray. We happened to pray the Rosary. I remember thinking, even though at the time I had a lot of doubts about my faith, like, that's what prayer feels like when I prayed the Rosary. So that was just a touchstone over the years.
It's interesting that so many people have a difficulty with the Rosary and with the Blessed Mother when they're coming from a Protestant background, especially from Baptist ones. Yes. I've heard people say, I don't even want to touch the beads, I
think perhaps just the emotional space I was in when that first happened, kind of a moment when I was uniquely receptive to it, as well as going through a lot of intellectual questions as well about the faith I was raised with. And just being willing to jump in and give it a try with the Rosary. It was a long time after that before I got to the point where I could articulate why I thought this was the case, why I thought this was a good prayer for a Christian to pray, as well as, even understand the oceans of theology that lie behind the Rosary. But at the same time, it was something on a very intuitive level that made sense.
And that you were willing to go with it before you actually understood why or what happened.
Just because of the moment there. Yes.
Yeah. And so then you came into the church in Alabama? Or
no, I was. It was kind of the process happened. I was in the middle of a move between Ohio and New Mexico.
Okay.
So stationed out of Dayton, moving towards Albuquerque.
So you went through the RCIA.
Exactly.
And you were received in the Easter Vigil?
Yes, the whole slam dunk, yeah.
How was that for you?
It was wonderful. I'm still friends with a number of the people I met going through the RCIA process. Just some wonderful folks who kind of over time as the vocational journey has developed have been incredibly supportive. In fact, actually my sponsor in RCIA himself is now a priest. He started seminary just a year before I did. There seemed to be something in the water that year.
I guess so. There's something about an adult going through that. I did accompany somebody who was coming in. She wasn't even baptized, and she came in as an adult. She just, the hunger grew, and I could see it. And once she was received into the church, she had this hunger to receive the Eucharist. And she was glowing, for months afterwards, really. And I'd never seen anything like it. It's one thing when someone has a reversion, you might see that from the paper. I've never seen someone not be baptized at all, going through that whole thing and then just seeing this. It's just extraordinary because it reminded me of what things in the early church must have looked like when you had the adult converts initially, obviously. It was a beautiful thing to see. And it rekindled fervor in me for certain things because I thought, well, my goodness, I should feel like that all the time. But, it's not about the feelings and all that. And I think that at some point she was missing having the camaraderie of all the people in RCIA because there's not a lot of mystagogy after that. There's supposed to be. It doesn't really happen, unfortunately. And so that was what she was missing. I don't know if you encountered that afterwards.
We didn't do a ton afterwards. I seem to recall maybe another 6 meetings or so, a month and a half after it. But I don't know. I had it by that point been plugged in well enough to the rest of the parish where I felt like I was growing and learning in other ways.
Okay. And so, tell me again the confirmation. St. Augustine.
St. Augustine. That's right.
So, what did you? Was it the Confessions? Was it one of his other works?
A number of his works. What impressed me about St. Augustine was this real just marriage of the intellectual journey with the interior movement of the heart towards God.
That's true.
Both of those things together. So, mind, obviously, the fact that it's nearly 2 millennia after he lived, and we still examine his works intensively for their meetings. So an incredibly just brilliant intellect, but somebody who knew very well the internal movements of the Spirit as well. So for me, I think, again, at the phase I was on in the journey, there was certainly the intellectual component, but also kind of coming to understand some things that were inside of me that God had put there that I hadn't before. So Augustine certainly has been, probably will always be, an inspiration for me on that. As far as a specific spirituality, to a certain degree, I believe a diocesan priest has to be a bit of a generalist when it comes to spiritualities. Being able to talk to people who come from a bunch of different angles and provide bits and pieces that can help them. It's interesting. I suppose as a deacon is really when I've kind of started to discover more of that, and a lot of it actually just comes from having looked back at, having been ordained for about a year now, sermons over the last year. It's like, okay, I was warned by this by a seminary professor. Take a look at your old homilies, see what you always say. Is there a verse that you always come back to? Is there something that comes up? Not that you should get rid of it, but just that you should be aware that this is a theme that consistently comes up. And for me, it's actually the Emmaus event. Is really, because I think a lot of my most intense spiritual moments, not necessarily anything huge, but just a sense of sitting next to Jesus Christ as a friend. Every once in a while, in a moment of intense prayer, just knowing that out of the corner of my eye, there he is right there in the Emmaus disciples. Were not our hearts burning as he opened the Scripture to us, and did we not know who he was as he broke the bread? So that for me is kind of the two poles, as it were, of, my spirituality, such as it is.
Now, when you guys, so Tim, you want to go back to the Air Force, be a chaplain there, right? But you are going to be diocesan priest. That's the plan. What aspect of that appeals to you, especially? Would you feel, is there one, I've talked to some who really, they love being a confessor. They want to be in the confessional. One thing you mentioned to me, Ben, in one class is you were talking about spiritual fatherhood, that's something that really struck you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mentioned earlier that I still recognize the good of natural fatherhood. And that was one thing that struck me throughout my whole life, when I was in high school, college, military, long before I discerned the priesthood. I always wanted to be a father. I wanted to teach people what I knew. guess, I wanted to raise kids and raise them correctly. Like my dad, I thought my dad raised me really well, so I wanted to do that for other people and to see them succeed. And so that has just transferred over to a different kind of fatherhood. So I want to do really the same thing, but for a parish of people that are not my biological children. But I want to teach them. I want to guide them. I want to encourage them to be good and to recognize the joy that comes from that and to recognize how that makes them better people.
And how about you? Yeah, we'll go back to Brad. In terms of the diocesan priesthood, then I have another question about Jim. We'll go ahead.
Yeah, well, I suppose for me, at least the passage in a book that was very important for me early in my discernment and before starting seminary. I don't know if y'all have ever read Gregory Dix's book on the Eucharist. It's a very fine historical study of the Eucharistic liturgy, one of the classics of the 20th century. But there's a beautiful passage towards the end where he gets into a bit of a purple prose mode and talks about all of the different places and circumstances where the Mass has been celebrated, where the Eucharist has been done. It's a very, very moving passage, everything from the election of a king to a simple bride and bridegroom in a little country church, at the launching of a new naval vessel to you name it. He goes through all this and then ends it with, and best of all, Sunday after Sunday in every parish church across Christendom, the priests have done exactly this to make the holy people of God. I really don't think that there's a greater privilege that God could give to a man than to be the spiritual leader of his people. It's an honor and something that just draws me. And doing it for the people where I grew up in Alabama, that's something I look forward to very greatly.
Oh, yes. So, this Sunday at the Ukrainian Greek Catholic parish here is in Piazza Maria del Monte here. And I didn't know this. I usually go to the early liturgy if I can get to it. It's a little after 7, but smaller crowd, you can sort of breathe, and it's nice and peaceful and quiet. The bishop was there this time. He's there frequently, actually, for Vespers and all sorts of things. But I haven't been there for the morning Divine Liturgy when he was there. So it was extraordinary to see this fullness of the ordination present in him. And it's a small little church, and the Eastern Rite churches in general are not very big, but there was the bishop, there were a couple of priests who were celebrating, and there was a small group. And there was just this moment of everything is right in the sense of here, the Holy Spirit is here where the bishop is where the church is. It's that anyone here can be sure that this is a great place to be right now. I mean, there's just nothing else. It was extraordinary. And there was a great humility about him. Like, he knew he was the leader of this group of Ukrainians here in Rome. But he's so approachable. This is a privilege we have at the Eastern churches. We have access to our bishops in ways that the Latin Rite, in general, most people don't. It's just so big. It's hard to get to. You have to make appointments and all that. It's different with us. It's right there. You just go up and say hello or complain. People do this all the time. That's when you know they're accessible, right? When the ladies go up and they complain about something, But he actually, I think he wrote a book about the experience of some of the Ukrainian women who come from the old country. They're here now working. They left families behind. It's a difficult situation on many levels, morally, spiritually, economically, everything. But he showed that he cared, and they are so grateful. It's amazing. But again, that moment he was there, and it was at the consecration, just before, they're preparing the gifts, and they take a particular veil that goes over the gifts, and as we're reciting the creed, they wave it over his head as he's bowed over the gifts, the two celebrity priests, and it's just, even the imagery is there of the Holy Spirit that is coming to, it's just beautiful. Okay, so anyway. Waxing poetic. I know what you mean. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah, it's great. Okay, and now, Tim, how do you see, I had a question for you about how you were going to approach being a chaplain. What do you see are some of the greatest needs? Obviously, they need the sacraments and all that, but you're in a different situation. I mean, that's a whole different ballgame, being in the military doing this.
It is and it isn't. So how do I approach it? The same way that these men approach it, in that I am a priest first. And the Archdiocese for Military Service is excellent in making sure that you are a priest first and a chaplain second. In fact, you have to serve generally at least 2, usually 3 years in your geographical home diocese in a parish before you're allowed to go on active duty. because you need to understand what it is to be a priest. And in fact, I'm actually very drawn to the Air Force in particular, one, because they sort of raised me, but each of the chaplains in the different branches serve very different roles, and the chaplains in the Air Force are most like parish priests in their diocese. You're essentially the priest for the base. You'll certainly deploy, you'll certainly go out on missions, and you'll be ministering to large numbers, both Catholic and non-Catholic alike. But in a sense, you are a priest first. So how do I approach it? Just like that. And then the second part, I believe, was
what would be unique about that? That would make it. That would distinguish it from being in a parish where it's just stable. I mean, if you're on a base, yes, to a degree, but I suppose you'll see more people come and go. If nothing else.
Sure. What's unique? There's even there isn't always a ton of control in a regular diocese. There's even less in the military as well, because you'll be literally all over the world from. And you'll be coming and going, and you won't be able to build as deep of roots, generally speaking, because you're not going to be set here for 5-10 years, for example. You might be in one spot for 2 or 3 years, but you could spend a year and a half of that deployed elsewhere. But the greatest needs and the challenges are the people themselves. So these are, if you haven't spent time with military families, I encourage you to do it in some way, shape, or form, because the people are just incredible. They're just, on all levels, they're just wonderful, wonderful people that just are giving so much, especially very hard on the families. Many of them make tremendous sacrifices. And when you meet the military Catholic families, they are just so overjoyed that there's a priest. They genuinely appreciate just having a priest that can offer them the sacrifice of the Mass, that can give them the sacraments. And there is something very beautiful about when a military community, especially overseas, come together and just rejoice in the sacrament and being able to bring Jesus to them, being able to forgive their sins, God willing, people that need it so very desperately.
When I was doing a little bit of research, we've got a little over 10 minutes we can get into this. So I was looking at the different websites for the Army and the Navy and the Marines. Now that one, it stuck out a little bit to me because the message was so clear. I mean, there was no doubt about what they're all about. You're fighting to win the battle, period. The other ones were other aspects that were brought out. And I found it interesting that the Navy website is the one that had statistics readily available. So I looked, and I didn't find how many are there. I mean, there's 300,000 or something that are in active duty. I mean, I wouldn't have known that. I went to the Army website. I couldn't find those readily. I didn't get a chance to look under the Air Force one. But the Marine one was totally different. It was that visual image, just fight and win the battle, that's it. But the idea of fighting is obviously part of what you had done. How has that helped you in persevering through maybe difficult times and discerning your call, coming here, your studies? I don't know what, if that's even come into play at this point. But you mentioned that the transition was somewhat seamless, so maybe you haven't had to do that yet.
For me, it hasn't necessarily come explicitly to the foreground. I think it has been just very naturally, but I think it has helped me because in the Navy, when I was attached to submarines, we go out for deployment, and even before when you're not on deployment. So first off, on deployment, you're going to go on a significant mission. The longest time I was out at sea was a little over 2 months. So that's a challenge, especially when the air conditioner breaks down, right? But even then, when you're on a seagoing vessel, you're constantly going in and out to sea, and so there's just this built-in challenge of sort of staying sane and being grounded in your home base, but where you're from, and that certainly just naturally helped me in facing any struggles that I have in the seminary. I've already got this kind of natural virtue of just persevering, even if I'm not moving forward. Well, at least I'm not moving backwards. To just stay. And
Do you have any thoughts on that?
say for me, it's certainly been helpful studying over here in Rome, specifically having had those types of, okay, I'm away from even where I live, and I already lived 1,000 miles away from my family, but even out of that context for extended periods of time, coming over here to study in Rome in many ways is a lot like an extended deployment.
Not nearly as does.
Yeah, but then it keeps getting extended. And
Food's better though.
Yes, that is true. Certainly no more of the meals rarely edible, as we used to call them.
How about you, Tim?
Well, it's fascinating. I don't know a lot of people that join, and there are maybe just the communities I've been surrounded with that join the military just because they want to fight. But it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning that you thought about calling this church militant, and we are. We are waging spiritual warfare, and we're called to fight the enemy. The evil one is out to bring souls away from Christ, and we're here to fight and win them back for Christ, for Him and His kingdom, and for the glory of God and their salvation. And even before I joined my diocese, my bishop would tell the seminarians that join, he said, just to let you know, this is not a cruise ship, it's a battleship. And there's something that does draw men towards that mission, towards that understanding of here's something that's in front of you, and maybe not fighting as much, but challenge. Move by challenge. And this is a grand challenge. And what an invitation that the Lord offers. As Brad said, and as many people here in the seminary do, you spend so much of your life fighting the Lord in this vocation, and then you come to understand what it is and the gift that you are invited into the lives of these wonderful families, men and women all over the world, who are looking to you to offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass and to bring Jesus to them. There's no greater gift. And it is a challenge. It will involve great spiritual battle, warfare, perseverance. But ultimately, He's the one who's already won the battle. So we're just doing what we can.
I have to think that it's difficult. I've had some friends who are diocesan priests. It's you hear the seminary getting formation with a lot of others who are in the same boat, right? And then once you're in a parish, you don't necessarily have that community around you and that support. And I've known, there's one bishop I was familiar with that every month he made a point of having his priests come to a retreat center. They would have prayer afternoon. They would have Mass in the morning, dedicated prayer time, nobody bothered them. They had lunch and they went off. And they loved having that fellowship with their fellow priests, which I think is a great idea. And they loved it. Even the ones who maybe at first thought, well, we have to share, whatever. I don't like that. No, but no forced faith sharing or anything like that. It was just a day to pray together as brother priests, and they had that fellowship. But others don't have that. And if you're not intentional about that, I think that you're going to come along, struggles are going to come along where you're going to have interior battles, whether prayer and aridity or whatever, or you're just in the parish and things aren't, who knows? You just don't know what's going to happen. But chances are you're going to you're fighting that at times, maybe even feeling alone. And I imagine that your training could translate well into that at some point. I don't know if you've thought about that yet or looked at it. I don't know if I made that the image I want to give you guys as we leave the show, but but it was that video on the Marines website, that was just really struck you. It was meant to evoke a visceral reaction. I think that's what it was. But the idea of facing fears and going forward and all that, you have to do that anyway. Even someone who decides to enter seminary when they hadn't maybe thought of it prior, or it could be totally life-changing, or you could be there for a year and just burn out. You don't know. But if you have a sense that this is it, your life is going to change, and you're just going to it's a challenge, and you have to go and meet it. I think we got about 5 minutes, and I was going to ask you guys about parasite I started babbling and I just forgot about it. Other military.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
Natalia, I have a question for Tim.
Yeah.
Tim, what's the atmosphere in services now toward religion? Is it freer now, or are there more restrictions, or what? I realize you haven't served there yet, but have you looked into that?
That's a very good question, and I have been out of the military now for about 2 years, so a lot can change in that amount of time. But it's okay. It could be better, to be perfectly honest. I think the freedom of worship and freedom of religion, not just freedom of worship, is always under attack in our country, not just in the military. And it's something that we can't ever take for granted, and that we need to ensure that we have that. So there are tremendous people, both in the military and outside the military, ensuring that there is religious liberty within the military. And I would say the Archdiocese for the Military Service, particularly Archbishop Berlio, has done exceptional work over the last 10 years to ensure just that there are Catholics that have no concerns for religious liberty, priests that have no concern for being fully Catholic in every way, shape, or form, and sharing that with great love and joy. So there are people that don't want the chaplain corps to exist. There are people that don't want there to be any semblance of religion in the military, and there probably always have been. But at this point, we can be very grateful that we have people fighting for battles for us, especially the current ordinary of the Archdiocese for the Military Service.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the challenges, huh?
Absolutely, always. Just in the military, you talk about the cost of freedom is not free, and it's never more than a generation away from potentially losing many of the great freedoms and liberties we've been given. So it's something that we can never be passive about, and always be promoting the truth of our Lord and being able to share that freely.
Well, I want to thank you myself. We're just about ready to close, but it was an outstanding program, and Natalia, you did a great job.
Oh, no, I thank my guests. It was them. I'm just glad that I've been in my classes, and it came to me.
You had a lot of good questions. That's what I'm saying. It was great.
Yes, it was. So I want to thank you all for being here, and good luck with your studies. As you know, where are you studying, all of you? I know where you are.
At the Gregorian University, doing a second cycle degree in Scripture.
In Scripture.
First year theology at the University of the Holy Cross.
Oh, Holy Cross. Okay. Okay. Well, that's great. And you've already been ordained deacon. You will be in September, and I keep telling you guys you have to get me a ticket if there are tickets ever. Oh, you still got a ways to go, Tim. You're a rookie. Okay.
Comes faster than you might think.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you very much for doing this. This is great. It's wonderful. So thank you very much. And thank you, Bob.
Thank you. And so we reached the end of the trail today. I want to thank you again, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same station. And I might be seeing you in person too, right?
Indeed.
So, all right. So we ask the Lord to bless us. May He bless each and every one of you. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.